It was around midnight, a few years ago, when I heard the sound of someone breaking into my house. I don't think I had had more than 20 minutes of sleep, but as soon as I heard the window being broken, I was wide awake and looking for my phone to call the police. My heart sank when I remembered that I left it downstairs, charging in the kitchen, the source of the break-in. Not having a gun, I grabbed a baseball bat and psyched myself up to go downstairs. Once I reached the bottom step, I saw the silhouette of a man sitting at my kitchen table. It was so dark I could not see what he looked like, but the stink coming off him was enough to curl my nose hairs. It was obvious, even without the lights on, that he was a drifter that fell on hard times. I was about to throw him out, but as soon as I turned on the lights, I couldn't help but feel bad for the stranger. His clothes were old, dirty, and torn, as though he had pulled them out of a dumpster. He was so skinny that I wouldn't be surprised if the man was sick. His hair was long and stringy, and just like his beard, it grew in patches. The way he sat there, motionless, with tears forming in his 1,000-yard stare, it seemed to me that he had given up on life. I was about to tell him to get out, but as soon as I opened my mouth, I noticed that he had a shotgun in his lap. Upon seeing this, I dropped the bat. I nervously asked him what he wanted, but he didn't answer me. Instead, he just sat still and stared straight ahead, as if I wasn't even in the room with him. Scared, I asked him if he was hungry, and if I could make him something. As a kid, I was instructed to give the homeless food instead of money, since they might buy booze or drugs with it. As I heated some leftovers in the microwave, I prodded the stranger with questions. What his name was, what he wanted, and if he wanted me to call anyone. He did not answer for a long time, and hardly noticed the food I placed in front of him once it was ready. However, once he started talking, he told me a story that would change my life forever. He said his name was Cole Dyer, and admitted to killing 20 people. I'm not at all embarrassed to say that I cried and begged for my life at this point. This only angered Cole, who ordered me to shut up and sit down so he could tell me something. Doing what he said, Cole told me his first victim was a street worker, who he choked to death. This one wasn't killed like the others, because he didn't know how he wanted to do it at the time, or for that matter, that he had a taste for it. After killing her, Cole expected someone to come by to arrest him, but after a while, with no detectives or police coming by, Cole figured he was in the clear. Finally having a way to vent his frustrations and no longer feeling like some cog in the machine, Cole's murderous fantasies took on a life of their own. Eventually, he started to consider himself the pass-it-on killer. The reason Cole liked that name could only be explained by his twisted sense of righteousness and questionable moral compass, which was explained to me in great detail. The gist of it was that if he killed enough pests, good things would come back to him. Symbolizing this, he would replace the head of his previous victim with the most current. Realizing killing people he knew was a sure way of getting caught, Cole learned what questions to ask complete strangers to discover the pests in their lives. Because who didn't like talking about themselves? Cole explained that he was great at talking to people and could talk the devil into lighting himself on fire. Because of this gift, it was easy for Cole to learn where these people lived, worked, drove, and more. Since the murders were spread out nationwide, and none of his victims had any connections to each other or Cole, the authorities were at a loss. When there was a news article talking about a murder, no one ever mentioned that they were connected. They would have had to by this point, yeah? I mean, each body had the head of the previous one. At first, hearing and reading the police talk about chasing down leads terrified him. However, After many years and many victims, these claims by the authorities didn't bother him in the slightest.
In the beginning, it felt as though a noose was tightening. I was jumping at shadows that only existed in my own head,
Cole said, after taking the first nibble of food. It was at this point that Cole demanded I grab a pen and paper to jot down his tale. Who was I to say no? Even though he had his hands on the table, there was still a shotgun in his lap. I didn't want to bet that it wasn't loaded or that I was faster. The safe bet was just to write down the story he was telling me, and hope he would show me mercy. While scouting for his 21st victim, Cole found himself behind a small series of apartment buildings. It was here Cole started to shake, as if he was scared.
I heard a small group of people huddled around someone's basement apartment, whispering to whoever was inside. They were a ways away, so I couldn't make out the details at the time. I could see that something wasn't right about them. They were dirty. Long, greasy hair and beards. But there was something else about them. Something evil.
One by one, they stopped their hushed whispering and turned their gazes towards Cole. This prompted Cole to return to his car, and on the way, he dared a peek over his shoulder. When he did, they were following him, but stayed just out of the cone of light the street lamps provided.
It creeped me out. I was already thinking of finding somebody else to kill, because I don't like killing in those apartment buildings. Too many neighbors to see your hair when you're using the saw, you know? When I saw them, though, that sort of settled it. I wasn't going to go back there. Kept looking back in the mirror on the way home to see if I was being followed. But in that 5-hour drive, I didn't see a thing behind me. The next day, however, I noticed a car driving slowly through my parking lot every few hours. Smoking lots of weed at the time, and I figured I was just being paranoid, but the next night I woke up to tapping on the door.
As Cole explained to me what happened next, he started to rock back and forth, the same way I've seen children do, in an effort to calm himself down before continuing his story.
That was my imagination at first. Then I started hearing my name being whispered from down the hallway. When I realized I wasn't imagining the noises, I looked out the peephole.
Cole described at least 5 filthy and malnourished faces, partially covered by long, unkempt hair, that did little to hide their dark, sunken eyes, that shined with a kind of hate and sin that even the pass-it-on killer feared.
They spent the entire night begging me to come out.
In the building Cole called home, it wasn't uncommon to hear drunken exes pound on doors, demanding to be let in. So their begging went on for hours. Eventually, a neighbor Cole never bothered to get to know, but who shared a thin wall, decided to open the door to tell the strangers to keep it down.
She stopped mid-sentence when she saw them,
Cole explained.
They pushed her back into her apartment and all piled in. They were tearing through her place for a while, and when she cried or begged or groaned, they just laughed.
Eventually, they made the woman call out to Cole and to beg him to come out from his apartment. Whenever she did, they would laugh and instruct her to say it louder. She would comply with their demands. When Cole refused to open the door or respond, they grew bored and started getting violent with the woman.
First the sounds of punches and then things getting broken, but then, Jesus, they were eating her. It was loud and wet and lasted until the sun came up.
I didn't want to interrupt someone who was obviously crazy. After all, who knows how a madman thinks? The best course of action for me to take was to remain silent and allow Cole to go on for as long as he wanted. Cole barely touched the meatloaf I heated up for him because he was too distraught. Considering how he looked, I thought he was going to inhale it. When Cole continued his story, He told me that he didn't leave his room until noon. By then, he was confident they were gone and that it was safe to leave.
There was no way I was gonna stay there. No fucking way.
After packing his car and making sure to remember the head of his previous victim was kept on ice, Cole went to some army surplus store to get what he needed to get away for a while. To Cole, this meant staying at a seedy hotel.
About a week later, I was getting some grub at a grocery store. Just walking in the parking lot, minding my own business, right? They drove up right behind me and laid on the horn. I didn't even bother getting something to eat after that. I just wanted to get the hell out of there.
By the time Cole remembered that he left the head of his previous victim back in the mini fridge at the hotel, he had already crossed 2 state lines. I could tell this bothered him greatly, and I assumed it was now because the police would have a lead to find the identity of the pass-it-on killer. However, as if reading my mind, Cole let out a dry laugh and told me the reason he was sour about it, even years later, was because he has completion anxiety. At this point of the story, Cole had to take a moment, and knowing that he had a shotgun on his lap, I gave it to him. Hoping that my kindness would be repaid, and I could keep my head once he finished his tale, I poured him some milk and offered him the rest of the baby carrots I had in the fridge. Since I live alone, I don't have much food for unexpected guests. At the time, I was sure the food I was offering him would be enough of an excuse for this psycho to kill me, and when I set it down in front of him, my hands were trembling. Cole traded his car for a van shortly after that encounter, because there was no doubt that whoever was following him knew what he was driving.
At least I could sleep in the van, right? Save money on hotels and shit.
It only took 5 weeks or so after trading in for the van that Cole crossed his pursuers' paths again. This time, he was in a deep sleep when he heard them say his name, causing his eyes to shoot open, immediately locking on the dark eyes of a woman with the same sinister resemblance as the men Cole had seen outside his apartment. Without a beard, however, this woman's disfiguration was more noticeable.
At first I thought it was a cleft lip and a chin, but it wasn't. The few teeth that she had were small and brown, and grew fucking everywhere.
Cole explained as his dirty fingers fidgeted with the gun in his lap.
Like the gums and the insides of the cheeks and shit.
Even in the dark, Cole could see their black eyes glow with hateful light. And when he turned over the engine, the headlights revealed dozens of her family, standing 10 feet or so apart.
Some were naked,
Cole explained, his eyes growing distant as he was reliving that painful memory.
They were standing still, smiling, just looking at me, like they were giving me permission to leave.
Cole told me that he swerved to hit a few with his front tire, or to at least clip them with the van's fat ass. However, they all stepped to the side, effortlessly avoiding getting run down. When I got the opportunity to ask what he meant by her family, he revealed that was a recent term given to them. At the time, he thought they were demons or vampires, but no longer thinks that's the case, for reasons he did not share at this time. For a moment, I wanted to ask him why this was, but I kept this question to myself. He was insane and armed, and I knew that opening my mouth would only get me into trouble. After that encounter, Cole abandoned the van and stole a car. He confessed to me that he would steal a new vehicle whenever he felt they were closing in on him. This feeling usually came with the tightening of his chest, and was triggered by anything from something he imagined seeing in the corner of his eye, to the cries coming from a murder of crows. Zigzagging across the country, Cole made every effort to forever rid himself of these people, and the hateful pulse that resonated from within them. Cole would stay inside at night, and if he could, he would sleep during the day. He would pass the time by reading and listening to music. It was a surprise to me that he preferred classical considering how he looked. My shock must have been apparent, because Cole explained that Vivaldi Concerto No. 5 was his favorite, and thanked his mother for getting him into tasteful music. While on the run, Cole would take odd jobs here and there to pay for what he needed to survive. A tractor assembly line in Michigan, a toll booth operator in Florida, and a semi-weight station in Nevada. Whatever job paid him in cash, and as long as he didn't have to work at night. No matter where he found work, he would not stay long before feeling that they were closing in on him, and would more often than not leave before getting his paycheck. I will spare you the details of what Cole felt he had to do to survive up to this point, but if even half of what Cole told me was true, that made me hate society even more than I already did. Up to now, he had been talking to me, a captive audience due to the shotgun on his lap, for well over 4 hours. During a moment of silence, I asked Cole if he wanted any coffee. He accepted, so I made a pot for the two of us to share. I could feel Cole stare at me with every movement I made, and my heart was beating so loud I swore Cole was able to hear it. It didn't make things better that the only thing either of us said was when I asked him how he wanted his coffee, and he answered,
"Very strong. No cream, no sugar."
Other than that, both of us were silent, and the tension could be cut with a spoon. As I waited for what I was sure would be my inevitable doom, I was fumbling around and nearly spilled the grounds. By the time the pot was half full, Cole continued his story. The night Cole came to my house was shortly after leaving a place he had stayed at for about 3 months, a loft above a bar in northern Canada. When asked why he would want to live above a bar while on the run, Cole shrugged and said that he thought a bar full of people at night would keep him safe. In exchange for the room, he would work as the janitor, and also unload trucks. He kept to himself, and people left him alone. The only time he was ever bothered was when there was work to be done. When they finally arrived, they softly cried out his name from the back alley under his window. With all the music being played downstairs, Cole had no idea how long they had been calling. But the moment he knew it was them, the giggling began. They flattered Cole by saying that they were his biggest fans, and tried to prove it to him by telling him details that only the pass-it-on killer would know.
"Cutting off a head is hard. Even if you have power tools, it's messy shit. It took a while before I got the hang of it, though,"
Cole confessed, oblivious to my disgust.
"I rigged a bike pump to a catheter, snaked it through the axillary nerve, until it reached the superior vena cava. Only took about 2 minutes before the blood stopped flowing. And by then, removing the head was pretty much blood-free."
I asked Cole why he would do that, and in one movement, he was no longer sitting. Instead, he flipped the table over and was standing over me. He shouted that the reason he killed how he didn't matter, because that wasn't the story he wanted to share.
"God gave you 2 ears, so you do twice as much listening. So shut up, clean this up, and let me go on so you can take more of your fucking notes,"
Cole snarled. As I cleaned up the mess, he swore to me that, up to this point, every time they appeared, he never spoke to them. But that night at the bar, he'd finally had enough, and accused them of being vampires, due to the fact that they needed permission to come in.
As soon as I said that, everything went silent. I must have been used to the sounds they were making, because I didn't notice it until it stopped. That's when someone with a strange accent told me they were not vampires, but in fact something else. Something that I...
Cole never finished this thought. In the silence that followed, I didn't know what he was going to do, and this terrified me. It might have been lack of sleep on my part, possibly even momentary insanity, but I had to know who or what was chasing Cole. When I asked, he didn't answer, so I pressed my luck and asked him what else needs permission to enter a house other than vampires. Again, he didn't answer. And even though I knew it was a mistake to poke the bear, I started to ask again. As soon as the words started to leave my mouth, Cole reached into his inner breast pocket and pulled out what I thought at the time was paper napkins. After inspecting it for a moment, with an expression I have never seen before, Cole slapped them down on the table between us. Written on them, in everything from pen to marker to pencil, were the messages, "Let us in," "Open the door," and more. It was hard to tell what else was said because the writing overlapped. However, it was clear to me that these messages were written by dozens of people. As I picked one up to look at it closer and ascertain what was written, my finger rubbed the glossy underside. Turning it over, I saw that it was a photograph. And in it, Cole was sleeping in what appeared to be a small apartment. The next appeared to be him in an abandoned bus, a dirty attic, and so on. In some of the pictures, Cole looked 20 years younger, and it made me wonder just how long he was on the run for. I know that stress can prematurely age people, but I had a hard time believing that the person in the picture and Cole were one and the same. Even though there was a part of me that knew what I was looking at, I needed to hear it from the man himself. But before I could ask, Cole said,
"They don't need permission to enter someone's house,"
he said, as he stared blankly into the empty space behind me. I had to look back to see if anything was there, and was more relieved than words could explain when I saw nothing was behind me. We sat there quietly for what seemed like an hour, before Cole said anything else. When he did, it was as if he suddenly remembered that he was telling me a story, and picked up where he left off. The part where they then cut the power to the apartment and the bar under him.
It didn't take long before the woman tending bar that night was shouting at them not to come closer. They just laughed. They tore her apart, and all I could do was wait until morning came.
Cole confessed with a shake of his head, as if to eject the thoughts from his mind.
Thing is, Canada has some long nights during the winter. I only had enough food for a few days.
Cole didn't tell me how long he stayed in that room for, and I didn't want to ask. It was obvious from the 1,000-yard stare that these events were still fresh in his mind, so I kept my mouth shut. When Cole left his room, he saw gore sprinkled everywhere, like a trail of breadcrumbs that started from behind the bar and led right to his apartment. Careful not to touch anything with his bare hands, Cole emptied the cash register and stole a toolbox from the back office, so he could switch license plates whenever he felt the need to in the future, to throw his pursuers off his scent.
I don't know how to stop them. I think I have a good idea how to slow them down,
Cole said. But before he could elaborate, he noticed that the sun was shining through my kitchen window, and we had been talking for hours. Grateful that he went another night without seeing them, and that he had someone to talk to, Cole thanked me for listening. I didn't know what to say to such a story. What could I say? In the pregnant silence that followed, I filled the void by rambling about whatever came to mind. My job, the annoying coworkers, and how my boss is always looking over my shoulder. As if this was at all similar to Cole's own story. I didn't think anything of Cole asking me if I liked my job or where I worked at the time, and soon I was answering all of his questions. After a short while, Cole thanked me. At the time, I assumed that it was because I took the time to listen to him. Then he took my car keys off the counter and left without another word. It might have been 10 minutes after Cole left before I called the police, and all I said to them was that my house had been broken into, and that my car was stolen. After all, If I said anything else, it might make me look as crazy as Cole. Maybe it was just me being tired, but I was truly afraid that the police would think I was insane if I told them the story Cole had told me. The more distance I put between myself and that night, the less real it felt. But then reality set in, when I learned that my boss was found dead a few days later. According to the local newspaper, the Whisper Alley Echo, pieces of my boss were found all over his bedroom. Most people in town consider this to be a rumor to stir up newspaper sales, and I wanted to agree, but it was hard to considering Cole's tale. In the back of my head, the idea of what Cole told me being true kept teasing me. It bothered me so much that I ended up hiring a private investigator, a decision I came to regret. I would rather be ignorant of what came next. A week after hiring the PI, I received a phone call informing me that my boss's head was found in the middle of another bloody mess all the way in Cleveland. Over the next few weeks, I kept thinking of the story Cole told me. If those thoughts weren't front and center, they were creeping in the back, ready to pounce on any happy moment and turn it sour. It didn't take long before I started seeing dark patches dart from one shadow to the next, disappearing as soon as I turned to look at it. At first, I chalked this up to being a mouse, the reflection off my glasses, or lack of sleep. After all, it was much harder to sleep in a house that was broken into. Hoping it wasn't mice, because of my hatred towards them, I bought some medicine in town so I could get some rest at night. It worked wonders when it came to getting shut-eye, but did nothing to stop me from seeing those shadows. With an embarrassing frequency, I would imagine the reflecting eyes on the side of the road were Cole's night visitors, or think of them whenever I heard the house settle. It was as though toying with the idea of them being real was enough to invite them into my life. I don't recall what came first. Hearing my name being called out in public, a sound similar to a murder of crows cawing, or the soft scraping at my screen windows at night. However, once I realized that the noises and the visions were real, there was no way to block them out. At night, the soft whispers were hard to make out, and the more I tried to ignore them, the more I thought about them. I could not tell you how many nights I stayed up, just so I could put my ear up to the wall, but I can tell you it was worth the effort. Because, unlike Cole, I know what they want. They whispered of a message that took months before I could understand it fully. But in those words that only someone with a certain madness could grasp, I understood. You see, they aren't a family like Cole said. They are more akin to nomads, who will only accept members with certain propensities to join their roving community. It wasn't as long as you might think before I did the one thing Cole was never brave enough to do, and opened the door. The first night I opened the door for them was terrifying. Even with Cole's descriptions, there was no way I could have been prepared for their appearance. Because they resembled humans the way sharks look like dolphins. During these conversations, they instructed me to share Cole's story with the world, so some of his madness could rub off on others and season the meat. In this partnership of ours, they only gained a buffet of people, while I gained so much more. Not only would they tell me tales I would pass off as my own, I could join their ranks. Heralding their coming will include everything from seeing shadows in the corner of your eyes, the sounds of whispering, and something similar to the cawing of crows. Once these, or any dozen of other signs occur, it's the beginning of the end. And when that happens, you can thank me. A better and far more successful pass-it-on killer than Cole ever was. Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/Jordan Group Horror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you, which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.